I am so pleased to be able to present this webinar entitled Living Fully After Loss at the invitation of Dr. David and Sherry. So it is my pleasure to do that. I want to say that this presentation will focus on grief and loss, basically, and how that impacts the body. It will include information about stress, because grief is a stressor. And if you heard Dr. David's presentation, he talked a lot about stress and how it impacts the body. And indeed, grief is a stressor. We'll be talking about some of the myths about grieving. We will also talk about some strategies for healing from loss and grief. And then, of course, we definitely have to talk about living fully after loss. So that's kind of what our schedule will look like for tonight. First, I want to tell you a little bit about me. Now, you had the opportunity to read some about me because the description on the website actually was fairly in-depth. But I am a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for a number of years. I am also nursing faculty. I've been a faculty for a number of years. I am also have been a nursing consultant to the University of Botswana in Botswana, Southern Africa. Basically, I'm having just a little bit of issue here, and I'm going to have to take a moment to get this squared away here, and then I will come back to you. Sorry about that. Okay, let me get rid of this. All right, so now I'm back in business. All right, so I'm a wife and a mother, happily married, 2 beautiful children, a son and a daughter, one of each, which is always, what we like to have. Well, in the middle of all of that, a tragedy struck our family. It was January 31st, 1997. My beautiful daughter, 21-year-old Candace, had gone to be a missionary in the Dominican Republic, where she had gone to serve as a missionary. And a couple of months after she arrived there, some construction equipment ran into her car. And it was that tragedy that set me on this new path. I found a new avocation, which is being a bereavement educator and a bereavement facilitator. So here you will see a little bit of my background and experience as a bereavement educator. First of all, I found Compassionate Friends, which is a support group for bereaved parents and siblings. And it was that group that really was instrumental in my journey this far. It has been more than 12 years now, and it has been quite a journey. But it was a Compassionate Friends where I learned to live again. I went on to serve on their board of directors. I spent 6 years as a member of the board of directors. I founded a new chapter of the Compassionate Friends in Washington, D.C. I'm an end-of-life nurse educator, all of these kinds of things. But my greatest joy comes from talking to and helping educate and support others who are grieving. Because I had so much support and I learned so much about grief and grieving that I wanted to share with whomever it may be beneficial a little bit about my grief journey and how I learned to live again. I said that our daughter has been gone now just over 12 years. Well, May 30th, which is Sunday, she would have been 35 years old. So I'm dedicating this presentation to our beautiful daughter, Candace Monique Ruff. All right. Now, let's move on then to tonight's presentation. As you know, Building Strength Webinars focuses on guidance in health. In other words, how the body and mind work together. And you also know that grief is a part of life. It's a normal part of life. And when we are grieving, our health then changes, our body changes. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about some of those changes. The stress of grief does place the body at in a very different situation. It makes the body work very differently. So we're going to be talking about how grief is a part of living and how it impacts our health. All right, let's start with what is loss. Because this is what causes the grief. Loss is the end or change of a familiar pattern of living. In other words, when we change our routine, when we end something, that is actually a loss. When we change our behavior, when we change our style of living, those are losses. Loss occurs along a continuum, and I'm going to try to draw a continuum here. All right. This loss occurs along a continuum from the small losses at this end of the continuum, things like you lose your keys, you lose your purse, things like you might lose your car to water damage and a flood, to wind, or even in a car accident. Moving along that continuum, you will have losses like maybe even loss of your home, because a lot of people have lost their home to foreclosures, so you have that loss. Still moving along that continuum. You also have things like broken relationships, divorce, losses of parts of the self, surgery, maybe an amputation, a mastectomy, loss of vision, loss of hearing. All of these are losses that we experience throughout our life. Continuing along that continuum, moving on up to the other end of the continuum is where the death of a loved one occurs. So you can see that loss goes across the spectrum. All right. Then, which takes us then to the subject of grief. Grief is that normal reaction to loss of any kind. It's a normal and it's a natural reaction to loss of any kind. Our grief is based upon a number of factors, how we feel it and how we respond to it. Things like our religion, our religious beliefs. It's a physical, it's an emotional, and a spiritual aspect to grieving. And as we said, grief is also a stressor. In addition to the term grief, we hear the term mourning. Well, mourning is actually the outward display of that pain. In other words, grief is the inside of the pain. So grief is what we feel on the inside, and mourning is how we display it. That may be things like wailing, it's things like crying, it may be slashing of the teeth, biting the nails. All of these are ways people display their mourning. So this stressor then, this grief that we feel due to the death of our loved one, and we'll be talking about death of the loved one, even though we know that grief occurs along a continuum, we will be talking about the death of a loved one as at the end of the spectrum. So, and most of my experience is associated with bereaved parents and siblings. And I am beginning now to work with people who have lost their spouse and had other losses as well. So a lot of what I will say cuts across all losses. So the stress response then happens because of this grief. And so to look more closely at the grief, the stress response. It's also referred to as the fight or flight response. If you see the picture here on your screen, this person has seen something, or there's something that's frightened him. And this is a protective mechanism that we have that indeed requires that we either be willing to fight or that we run away. And this fight or flight, this next picture, for example, also is a fight or flight response. He's either hit something, he's seen a terrible accident, or what have you. That fight or flight response that you see there is it impacts the entire body. This picture here, across the top, we could actually add the word, where we see mind and emotions, we could add the word grief. Because when that stimulus impacts our being, the stimulus is sent, the message goes to our brain here at the hypothalamus. Then the brain sends messages through our hormones to all parts of the body. The brain begins to secrete hormones that actually cause us to get ready to fight or to get ready to run away. And in so doing, all of our body systems are impacted. And I'll show you in a moment how that affects each body system and how that indeed then moves on to cause the feelings that we get while we are grieving. So this next slide, for example, shows you some of the physical manifestations. That grief that actually is stimulated because of the stress response, then the nervous system is impacted. What happens when you get frightened? There's an increased heart rate, you start breathing rapidly, you can't catch your breath. So when you're grieving, and this is something it's long term. In other words, the grieving goes on for a long period. It's not just that you see something frightens you and you get over it. So what happens then is the nervous system is still in a state of alarm. It is going on in this state for a long time. So when we are newly bereaved, we are continuously feeling agitated, we feel tense, there's a sensitivity to noise, we jump at the start. If we hear something, we may end up having things like headaches, we may not be able to sleep, we may not have much energy, we feel tired, aches and pains, our joints get tight, we're so tense that everything hurts. There may be some lightheadedness. There's also shortness of breath sometimes. People who are in acute grief either have a shortness of breath or they breathe too rapidly. They breathe very fast. Or you may hear them sighing. All of these things happen in the stress response. And since we are under stress for so long, then this goes on for a long period. The digestive system gets impacted. Some people overeat. Some people cannot eat. So there's a loss of appetite. They may have a queasy stomach. They may overeat to the point of gaining weight, or they may not eat at all and they lose weight. They may have problems with excretion, elimination, things like constipation. Constipation can be a big problem. Things like diarrhea. All of these things happen to us when we are in acute grief. In addition to the physical changes, there are the emotional changes. And this is where we can really, really relate to how we're feeling. The anxiety and the worry. When you lose a loved one who's very close to you, then you worry about your surviving family members. You worry that something may happen to them. You may feel angry or guilty. Certainly, you're going to be crying. Lots of emotional changes go on here. You may also feel depressed, or you may even feel like you want to die because it hurts so badly. So indeed, these are all things that we feel on the inside. Our heart hurts. It feels like it's breaking. These are things that happen to us during acute grief. And I might say that these are normal things under the circumstances. So be aware that while they are happening to you, it is a normal, natural reaction to what's happened to you. Here is someone who's looking in great despair here. So these are some of the emotional kinds of things that happen to us during acute grief. All right, there are also cognitive changes, and these can be very, very troubling depending upon your line of work. For example, memory loss, tremendous memory loss. On a personal level, I can very much say that I remember how devastating it was to have such poor memory. And as a teacher standing up in front of students, it was quite devastating. The other thing that happens is you can't concentrate, which means then that it becomes difficult to get things accomplished. You go from one task to another. You're not able to actually get much done because everything gets undone. You start this and you start that, and everything is left undone. It's also difficult to make decisions. And I want to say a word about decision making right here. When we are in acute grief, and when I say acute grief, usually the first year plus is when we designate that as acute grief. But it can be even longer, and it can be a little bit shorter, but we encourage people not to make any major changes during that first year of grief, because what happens is we make decisions based upon our emotions. We may decide to sell the house and move somewhere else. We may decide to change jobs. We may decide any number of things based upon how we're feeling at that particular time. And those may not be the best things for us at a later date. So please, please, please postpone making any major decisions until at least you're at least 1 year into your grief. Now, all of these things are normal in grief, and they are temporary. And that's the good news, is that they are temporary. So even though you're feeling like, oh, this will never do be aware that, yes, it will get better. All right, let's move on then to some other grief reactions. And then in a few moments, I'm going to ask you for perhaps any other things that you have noticed that I have not had on the list here, because there's so many things. So if you want to think of a question, and you can start to send in your questions, and I'll answer those in just a moment. But a couple of other grief reactions here. Feeling abandoned. You feel as if your loved one just went off and left you. How could they leave me? Certainly isolated, because you feel as if you're the only one who's ever felt so bad because your loved one is gone. But yes, those isolation feelings are also very, very normal. Then there may also be things like spirituality issues. Things like, why did this have to happen to me? Where was God when the accident happened? Why, all of these kinds. Many people have said that they lost their belief in the Lord. They lost their religion, so to speak. So these are some of the things that we are confronted with the death of a loved one. And I think for people who've lost children, and I know some of you out there have lost children, it can be especially devastating. We expect to bury our parents. We know that that's going to happen. And one of the spouse, we know that one or the other of us is going before the other. So usually one person's left behind, and we expect to do that. But we do not expect to bury our children. And that is a very, very devastating loss. So, and you see the spirituality issues begin to crop up, especially in people who've lost children. I know many clergymen who have said that they lost their faith for a while because their precious child had died. All right, let's move on then to any questions or answers that, well, let's see, I guess I don't have that up yet. Let me spend spend a couple more slides here talking about, while we were talking about how the body is impacted during grief, brings up the subject of health concerns, because it is one of those things that we talked about how the all of the body systems are in a state of alarm, state of continued stress, and indeed the body is stressed. Okay. And so in being stressed, then the immune system actually shuts down, which means that you're at increased risk for illnesses. Colds and flus are much more common. Many people have illnesses they never had before. I've heard several bereaved parents talk about ended up with a diagnosis of diabetes, never had any problem in their life. So we can see how the stress does impact every system in the body, and especially the respiratory system. Because what happens is we actually breathe shallow. Let's take a moment and just take an inventory of your breathing. Put your hands on your chest and just feel that there's little to no movement. Breathing is something that we do automatically. We don't think very much about it. So if you could feel your chest, you probably feel very little to no movement. So notice that, and just take inventory of your breathing. Because what I'm going to do is actually walk you through a quick exercise on breathing properly. Because breathing is one of the most beneficial things that you can do during acute grief. And I say breathing, but I mean breathing deeply, breathing properly is beneficial, because hopefully we all are going to go on breathing. And yes, it does go on in spite of all that's happened to us. All right, so what I want you to do is sit comfortably in your chair with your feet flat on the floor. And I want you to breathe in and out through your nose. Inhale and exhale through your nose. Inhale and exhale deeply. And inhale and exhale again very deeply, and do it mindfully. And mindfully, I mean think about the breathing as you inhale slowly and deeply, and exhale. And when you do so, you should hear a sound. It's important that you breathe deeply, because that is what kind of initiates the relaxation response. It's amazing how just breathing deeply encourages you to relax. And under the most stressful situations, if you do indeed breathe properly, you will feel 50 to 100% better. So let's take that a step further now. And what I want you to do is, I want you to breathe deeply, and I want you to force the air all the way down to your belly button. So inhale, and then exhale. So inhale, force the air down to the belly button. And when you do that, your abdomen should actually rise, actually move so that the diaphragm rises. Then when you exhale, continue to breathe deeply while I explain this a little bit further. When you exhale, I want you to actually breathe through the nose, but I also want you to put your hand on your lower abdomen to force the air out to completely exhale. So I want you to inhale, forcing the air all the way down to your belly button. And exhale, press on your abdomen as you force the lungs to expel the air. And inhale, and I want you to do it 2 or 3 more times before we go on. But what happens when we breathe very rapidly is we actually then start the stress, the fight or flight response. So we want to focus on breathing slowly and deeply. Now, at first, you may get a little bit lightheaded, so you don't want to do it too rapidly. Doing it slowly is what is important. So we'll do a couple more together. Inhale and exhale. Forcing that air all the way down and then forcing it all the way out. Inhale. Forcing it down to your belly button. And exhale, press on your abdomen to force the air out. Okay, so hopefully you're feeling just a little bit tense, a little bit less tense than you were when you first started. Okay, breathing is so important, and especially during this time of stress. So do breathe and be careful that you exhale and do it mindfully. And I really was going to have this picture here for you to watch while you are focusing on your breathing. But it's always helpful to have something that's soothing. This waterfall is put there to be soothing for you to focus on while you are breathing. It also helps to close the eyes while you're breathing. And exhale. The other thing is that if you exhale through pursed lips, it helps you to be able to elongate your breathing. So inhale and exhale. Helps you to elongate your breathing. And that breathing in itself basically is a meditation, breathing meditation. And I took the time to do that with you because learning how to breathe again is very, very important in stress relief and so very important in grief. All right, so we talked about exhaling. Other things that are so important during this critical time that we're under so much stress from the death of our loved one, I want to talk about drinking adequate fluids, which reminds me to take a sip of water because we get so easily dehydrated. Because who's thinking about water during this time of acute grief? We are in such tremendous pain that we don't think about adequate fluids. We don't think about proper nutrition, the need to avoid those sweets and high caffeinated beverages and all these kinds of things. But we are at increased risk for illness during the time that we are grieving in the early months and years. The other thing that's important is sleep and rest. Many times it's very difficult to sleep, so at least get adequate rest. Relaxation, I'll say a word about that it will occur later in the program when we talk about exercise. So I'll save those two for just a little bit later. The other thing I would like to say is I'd encourage you to get a checkup at least that first year of your grief, if you haven't already had one. If you have a chronic illness, diabetes, if you have hypertension, any chronic illness that you already have, by all means, go and get a checkup. All right, so when we are grieving, we are at increased risk for illness. All right, now we are at the questions and answers. So this is an opportunity for you, if you have things that you would like to add to that list of things that you're feeling with your acute grief that I didn't talk about, you can send me an email with that. Or if you have questions or comments about things that I've talked about so far, why feel free to send me an email and send me a chat message, and I will basically try and answer it for you. All right. So that's the time for questions and answers, and there will be another time as well as at the end of the presentation. I don't see any yet, so I will keep looking every now and then. But I want to move on to this next topic, which is some myths about grief. And if I were sitting in front of you, if we were in a room together, I would be asking you to tell me which of these things are myths and which are realities. So since you're not here, I will have to answer that, I guess. All right, this first one says, the grief process is basically the same for everyone. That is a myth. The grief process is very different for every one of us. We all are very much an individual, and we grieve differently in our own way and in our own time. The second bullet here says that grief usually ends after about a year. That is a myth. For many of us, grief doesn't even start until about a year, especially in the sudden death of a loved one. It is a time when the shock is so great that it takes almost that long to realize that that person's gone forever and not coming back again. If you're involved in the legal system, it's also going to take a while for that grief to kick in. So after about a year, the only thing that has happened in a year is that you have had a chance to go through all of the first birthday, the first Christmas, the first Mother's Day, the first Father's Day, all of those things. So that is about the only thing that happens in the first year. Excuse me. Some people expect that after the first year, the second year is going to be so much better. Well, not always. Some people have said that the second year for them was worse than the first. Well, for me, I don't remember any real difference between the first year and the second. I just remember that they were all bad in the early years. So, I can't promise you that it's going to be any better the second year, but I can promise you that it will get better. I just don't know exactly when. All right, the next bullet. We eventually get over our loved one's death. That's really a myth. We don't get over our loved one's death. We learn to live with it, and we learn to get through it. Another myth is that when a loved one dies, our relationship with that person ends. That's a myth. Just because our loved one died, it doesn't mean that we have stopped loving them. Even though they're no longer with us physically, we still love them. Our love didn't die. Okay. This next bullet. There are distinct stages of grief that we must all go through. That is really a myth. Because when you talk about stages, it suggests that it's an orderly progression, a predictable road to travel. Well, we know from experience that grief is not orderly. It is not predictable. It is more like a roller coaster, up and down, basically. Sometimes we don't know from one day to the next or from 1 hour to the next how we're going to be feeling. So it is not a predictable process, and it is not a stage process. I think what happened with this, how we got involved with that stage process, is that when the work done by Dr. Kubler-Ross was presented a number of years ago, that was all that we had. And she described the stages of grief, but those stages of grief were stages of grief for people who were actually experiencing a terminal illness. They were all cancer patients who were in the late stages of death, or getting ready for death, I should say. And it was then that we picked up that stage theory and kind of ran with it, because that was all that we had. But she did not mean for that stage theory to be applied to those of us who are grieving the death of our loved one. So what we know now is that there are individual pathways to grief that we do it in our own fashion, that there are no distinct stages. Okay, this last bullet here says that grieving alone makes it easier on the person. It doesn't really make it easier on the person. What it does is it provides you the opportunity to hide from others, but it doesn't make it any easier. In fact, we encourage people not to be alone in their grief. We would like to ask you to try and have someone with you, because it helps keeps things in perspective, and it also helps keep things real. So grieving alone does not make it easier for the person. A couple more myths here. It's more helpful to the bereaved person if the person's name is not mentioned. So many times we hesitate to mention the person's sister or brother or husband or child for fear that we will remind them. Well, guess what? They never forgot that their loved one is gone. In fact, most, if not all, of the hundreds of bereaved parents that I've spoken to over the last excuse me, over the last 12 years say that they welcome your mentioning their child's name. In fact, we are overjoyed when you say something about our child. So, no, don't be reluctant to mention the bereaved person's name. By all means, say their name. All right, this next one. This is an interesting one. Just give it time and the grief will slowly subside. Is that a myth or is that reality? It is actually a myth, because it is not only time. Time will help give you the opportunity to stuff your grief and stuff your pain and hide it very well. But if you've only waited for time and have not done any work, any grief work we call it, if you've not done any grief work, then it just kind of goes in hiding. So I encourage you to not hide from your grief, but work at it. And we're going to talk about some of the things to do to do work, to do our grief work. So, no, we have to do more than just give it time, but we have to work at healing from our grief. All right, this next myth. If we just say the right thing to the person, it will take away their grief. Well, guess what? There is nothing we can say that's going to take away their pain. Nothing we can say. What we can do is we can offer you our support. We can say, I'm sorry for your loss. We can say, I don't know how to help, or I don't know what to say to you. I wish I could help, but there's nothing that's going to take away the pain. So just be there to listen, give a hug. That's all that we need. This next one is actually true. Men and women do grieve differently. What we've actually found is that there are masculine and feminine styles of grieving. So some men grieve like in the feminine style and vice versa. So there is a difference in how men and women grieve. And just two more, I'll just take the last one here. There's no one right way to grieve, and that is true. There's no one size fits all. We each have to find our own path. We each have to do it in our own way. So much for myths. Okay, any comments from anyone at this point? I see a message here. Someone says that their son was recently shot and killed, and the church seems to encourage us to forgive the shooter. But I'm not ready for that and don't know if I'll ever be. Why do I feel like the bad guy? Okay, why do you feel like the bad guy? My response to that is, as a griever, don't let people make you feel guilty. You are not the bad guy. And you should not have to forgive until you're ready to forgive. And you will get to the point that it will no longer be important how you feel about the other person. But earlier on, it's so fresh and so intensely painful. And I liken the feelings that you get regarding the death of a loved one. If you put your fingers in over your eyes, you put your hand over your eyes, you actually, all you can see is the darkness and your hand. And that's like grief. All you can see is the pain of the grief. But as you gradually move your hands away from your face, you can see that light comes in. There's light all around you. You can see the trees. You can see the birds. You can see the people. You can see the houses. You can see other people. But at first, it hurts so badly, and it's so painful. And everything that people say to us, we feel as if we have to somehow abide by it. Well, we don't have to. This is a time that we need to decide for ourselves what feels good for us and what feels right for us. So you're not the bad guy. And I am so sorry for the death of your loved one, your son. Marion says, what about when you lost one child that was murdered, and just when you are moving forward, you lost another one to a car accident, and your third child almost dies to breast cancer? What are your suggestions about moving forward? Wow, Marion, that's a toughie. That is a real toughie. And I'll talk a little bit about moving forward, but my heart breaks for you because that is tough. And I don't have any magic answers for that, Marion. Um, that's a real toughie. And thank you for sharing that with us. It is a toughie. Hopefully, something I say when we talk about moving on and healing will strike a chord with you. Hopefully, it will be helpful, but I I don't know. I For those of us who have supreme beings, if we're Christian and believe in God, that may be some consolation. But then there's also the question about where are you, God, in my despair? So I don't know how to answer that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, that's a toughie. So how can we learn to live fully after loss? The first thing we have to realize is that grief is a journey, not a destination. That means that we will be on this journey for a long time. There are lots and lots of things that we can take with us on this journey, but we are not going to get to our destination anytime soon. So grief is a journey, not a destination. But there are some healing strategies that we can use to take with us on this journey, this grief journey. The first one is writing. Writing is a tremendous healing strategy. And under writing would be things like journaling. Journaling and it's just a fancy word for taking a piece of paper and a pen and actually writing down your feelings. Writing down about how much it hurts, about how rotten life feels right now, about how it feels when everybody else is moving on with their life, the world is continuing to move on, and your loved one is no longer here. Writing those feelings, the journal is so helpful because it's for your eyes only, and it is an opportunity for you to write and talk about your feelings. You don't have to worry about grammar, punctuation, spelling, and all those kinds of things because it's only for your eyes. It is a great opportunity. You can write letters to your loved one. You can tell them the things that you wish you had said when they were here. You can tell them about the regrets that you have. You may also tell them about what's going on in your life now. So the journal is a wonderful, wonderful therapeutic tool for healing and taking along on this grief journey. Another thing that's important, or let me go back to the writing, because in addition to journaling, there are books, and I'm going to talk about writing books and other things. But people also write music. Beautiful, beautiful songs describe the pain of grief and the healing. Things like poetry. Writing poetry is also very, very therapeutic. Any of those kinds of things. But the important thing about journaling or writing is getting the feelings outside of you. Because when they stay on the inside, your heart aches and you basically keep the pain inside. So what you want to do is get the pain out, and writing is a great way to do that. Reading is also a wonderful therapeutic tool for healing. Reading does a number of things. It provides you with information, tells you about how people have coped with their loss. It tells you about what grief is, what to expect. So it provides a great deal of information. And that information in itself can be very, very supportive. Which brings up the subject of books. And I just put a few just listed a few there, but I've got some in front of me, for example. Um, Andes Mountain, for example, written by Dwight Patterson, talks about father's grief. So there are books written by bereaved fathers. Roses in December, written by Marilyn Hevelin, and that is a great book. Bereaved mother who lost 3 children, and very, very inspirational. So even in the wake of the death of 3 of her children, she could still find roses. And that's how she described her roses in December. Another book written by a bereaved father called Take the Dimness of My Soul Away. Bill Ritter. Bill Ritter talks about his son's suicide. So, Causes of Death is another way to approach writing. Swallowed by a Snake, written by Tom Golden, is a book that talks about the masculine side of grieving. And he talks about how different it is for men. And he likens it to being swallowed by a snake and how you find your way back to life. Books also written by siblings. Courage to Grieve by Judy Tattlebaum is a wonderful book. It's got tremendous information in it about grieving, what it is, how it feels. She is a bereaved sibling whose brother died when they were both young adults, and she did not actually work on her grief until she was in medical school, I think, or maybe graduate school, serving as getting ready to be a therapist herself. And she finally realized she had not dealt with the death of her brother. And at the top of this list here is Life After Loss by Bob Dietz. And that is one of my most favorite books. This book was given to me as a gift the first month following our daughter's death, and I was amazed at that book. It gave me information about what grief is and about how grief feels. And it was helpful for me because at that time, even though I had been a nurse for umpteen years and had worked with families, had seen people pass away, but I had buried both parents. But I really did not know what real grief felt like until my daughter died. And so that book, Life After Loss, gave me some information I really did not have. It helped to normalize my grief. It helped me to see that what I was feeling was indeed normal. So I would read and cry, and I would cry and read. And I'd put the book down beside the bed, and I'd feel so bad, and I'd pick the book up, and I'd read, and I'd cry. My memory was so bad, so I could not remember what I'd read, and I'd keep reading the same thing over and over again. But it was like having my own therapist right there in the room with me. So that was a wonderful book. So much for books. There are hundreds and hundreds of wonderfully written books by bereaved individuals, by therapists, by professionals, by lay people. All kinds of resources are out there. And I do want to tell you about my book. It's entitled Her Light Still Shines, as you can see there, and it is telling the life story of my beautiful daughter, Candace, and it includes my grief journey. So I had to kind of throw that in there also. All right, so reading is another way to help with the healing. This next slide talks about let's get physical. That's where I want to talk about exercise and how important it is for exercise. It doesn't matter what kind of exercise you do, but choose an exercise that you enjoy doing. whether it's jogging or running or walking or riding a treadmill or riding a cycle, doing yoga or whatever. Choose an exercise that you enjoy doing. And when you do, that is going to be so therapeutic. It will help lessen the stress, will help increase the hormones that make you feel good so that it will elevate your mood. It will help strengthen your bones and joints. If you had to pick one activity to do during your grief, I would say exercise. Exercise does many, many things for the body, and it certainly relieves the stress. Associated with that is, on the other side here, you see someone doing yoga. Well, yoga is one of my favorite exercises. And what it does is it gives you the strengthening of your muscles and tendons, but it also relaxes the mind. It focuses on the breathing and gives you the opportunity to just relax and learn how to breathe deeply. It's wonderful. If you have never done yoga, I'd encourage you to try it. Just try it for a couple of times, and you won't notice anything dramatic at first. It will only occur gradually, but it is a wonderful, wonderful exercise. So exercise is another one of those therapeutic tools for healing from grief. Support. Support is also very, very important for healing from grief. There's group support and there's individual support. And I want to say a word about group support, because you heard me talk earlier about Compassionate Friends. This is a support group for bereaved parents and siblings. That group was so instrumental in my healing. I would probably not be sitting in front of you tonight had I not gotten a very good start on my healing as a part of attending that support group. And I'll say a bit more about that on the next slide. But there's also individual support, and we can get support from our family members, support from friends, co-workers, but it's important to have that individual support as far as possible. Now, one of the things about support from family members and from co-workers, the thing about that is after a while, they get a little bit tired of, it's about time for you to move on now. And you'll hear that quite often. It's about time for you to move on now. Well, that's where group support comes in. The grief support group is always going to be there. They don't ever tire of hearing you cry, of hearing you a year, 2 years down the road talk about how much it still hurts. Support groups, Compassionate Friends, is one that I really, really cannot say enough good things about. So get support, grief support, group or individual, is so important. The support group, if you wanted to locate there are a couple of bereaved parents who have sent me messages. Locating a group of Compassionate Friends, go onto the website, compassionatefriends.org, and select the city that you live in and find the group that's closest to you. I encourage you to attend that meeting at least 3 times, because each meeting tends to be slightly different. But don't underestimate the power and the benefit of being involved in a support group, because you get the opportunity to tell your story repeatedly, over and over. Every month we tell our story. And the interesting thing that happens is when we first tell our story, we talk about the illness or the accident that caused their death. But then the story begins to evolve into their life, what their life was like, what they liked to do, what they enjoyed. So repeating your story is very, very therapeutic. It helps being a part of the group, helps to lessen your feelings of abandonment. If you lost a spouse, you may be feeling very alone. But if you can join a group of people who also lost their spouse, you don't feel quite so abandoned. There's a great deal of power in talking about your loss, talking about what it means, what it feels like, and also talking about what you're doing about it. You get great ideas from other people who are also on the same journey that you're on. Remember that a pain shared is pain diminished. Also, joy shared is joy enhanced. So share the pain and share the joys. All right, so support groups is another benefit there. So these are some strategies then for helping with the healing. So then the question becomes, what does this healing look like? Or what does it feel like? Or how do I know I'm healed? Well, first of all, let me say that healing is, well, let me back up a little bit and say that life is different after your loss. After the death of your child, you are a different person. After the death of your parent, you're a different person. After the death of your sibling, you are a different person now. Your spouse, you are a different person. So you do need to realize that you are never going to be the same that you were. Now, your coworkers will say to you, oh, I will be so glad when you get back to being your old self. Let them know that you're not going to be quite yourself again. You're not going to necessarily be any better, but you will be different, and you will heal. You will get better. Healing then is learning to live with the vacancy and being able to gradually create a new normal for yourself. A lot of things will be different. You will react differently to things. Other things will become important. Things that you thought were so important in your life may not be as important as you once thought. Healing does not mean not hurting again. I'll repeat that. Healing does not mean that you're not going to hurt again. What it does mean is that the pain is lessened and it'll gradually become less and less, but it will never completely go away. Healing means life is meaningful again. You can find meaning again. At first, it's very difficult to find anything that's meaningful, anything that's helpful for you. But yes, healing means that life is meaningful again. And healing also means that there's laughter and joy, and you don't have to feel guilty about it. So that's kind of what healing looks like. Yes, there will always be some pain, especially on those special days, and we'll talk about special days a little bit later. All right, just a word about feelings. Some of the feelings that we have, it's important to express them, and some of the more common feelings are anger and guilt. Angry at perhaps the person for dying. Maybe they were careless, maybe they didn't take care of themselves. Feeling guilty that maybe we should have done something to protect them, maybe we should have known that they were ill. But those feelings, it's important to express them, and it's great to be able to express them in a support group. It's great to be able to share them. Share them in your journal, share them with others, especially in your support group. And finally, it's so important to avoid deadening those feelings with alcohol or tranquilizers or drugs. The only thing that those products do is they postpone the pain or they hide it. but it doesn't deal with it. So avoid using alcohol to deaden the pain. Avoid using drugs and tranquilizers. On the right there, you will see the hammer. Some great ways to deal with anger, for example. Banging on something, building something, working in the garden, nailing, hammering, screaming, screaming on the pillow, screaming in the shower. In one workshop I did, someone said screaming in the car. Well, just make sure you're not driving when you're screaming in the car. But getting those feelings out, so very important. Okay, that's about feelings. So with doing some of those things, then hopefully it will then focus on living fully. Okay. The one thing that's important is to acknowledge the reality of the loss. That yes, you are indeed experiencing a tremendous loss, and that's the reality of it. So I encourage you to acknowledge the reality of the loss and embrace the pain. Now, that is not easy because as humans, our instinct is to want to get away from pain, to want to try and avoid it. But I encourage you to embrace the pain. And embracing the pain means telling your story, even though the tears are streaming down your eyes. That's all right. I was talking to a young lady a couple of nights ago, and she had just come on the first anniversary of her husband's death, and she said, I kept trying not to cry. And that's not helpful to you. Let the tears flow. That's what they are for. Tears are therapeutic. And it's so important that we let the tears flow wherever it is. I know it's embarrassing. Your makeup runs. I know all about that. I understand that. But you have got to let the tears flow because it's getting those feelings out. Don't avoid the tears. Share the feelings. Tell your story over and over again. Living fully, we've got to each choose our own time and our own methods. In other words, if it takes a year, that's fine. If it takes 2 years, that's okay. If it takes 3 or 4 years, that's okay as well. We each have our own timetable. There's no set timetable. There's no rule anywhere that says you have to be done with your grief in a year. Nor is there anything anywhere that says it's got to be done in 2 years or 5 years for that matter. We each have our own timetable, and we alone can decide when we are on the right journey and when we are healing. So use your own timetable and realize that we each grieve differently. Another thing that can help us to learn to live fully is learning to hug again. Hugging feels so good, especially when we're so broken and we're in so much pain. Just to be hugged feels very, very good. And even hugging ourselves. Have you ever tried to hug yourself? Just now, put your arms around your shoulders and just hug yourself. Just squeeze yourself. Doesn't that feel wonderful? Giving yourself a great big hug feels so good. Accept the fact that yes, you are a different person now. Accept that fact. And remember that though death comes, love never goes away. And Dorothy Sims reminds us of that. She says, though death comes, love never goes away. And that's true. We don't love our loved one any less because they're gone. I still love my daughter, and she's been gone more than 12 years now. Remember that our loved one lives on in us. and through our memories. It's the memories that are so, so wonderful and so helpful to us during the times that they are no longer with us. So it's those memories that are very, very important. While we are learning to live fully, it's important to be kind to ourselves. That means if you need some time alone, take it. By the same token, don't isolate yourself. Give yourself small rewards along the way. Just be good to yourself. Buy yourself a new book. Buy yourself a rose. Anything that's going to make you feel a little bit better. Pamper yourself. Treat yourself to a massage. To go to the beauty parlor. Get your hair done. Get a facial. Get as I said, a massage. Wonderful, wonderful way to pamper yourself, to be good to yourself. Take a short trip. Now, take a trip just for a break because you can't get too far away from that grief. That grief is very, very pervasive. It permeates all of our life. So you can't get very far away, but it will give you a small break from the grief. Now, when you come home, I will remind you, or warn you rather, that when you come back home, you're going to find that the grief is there waiting for you, but you did get a little break while you were away. Another thing that's helpful is to carry in your possession, in your pocket or in your purse, a favorite poem, a Bible verse, or something that will be helpful that you can actually just pull out and read when the going gets really tough. Here's a little one here that I found on Grief Share. And basically it just says, Divine Light, or Lord of Heaven, or Dear God, or whomever your supreme being is. Calm my heart and help me to remember right now the precious memories I can learn from, grow from, and treasure in my heart daily. That's just an example of a quote that may be helpful. Some people use the 23rd Psalm, other verses of the Bible that they may find especially meaningful, poems by Helen Steiner Wright. Helen Steiner, I believe is her name. Beautiful, beautiful poems. Anyway, I suggest that you carry something like that in your possession so that you can actually read it when the going gets really, really tough. Still under this living fully but being kind to yourself is enjoy the good days. There will be some good days. There will be a lot of not so good days also. But enjoy the good days, and it's all right to laugh. Don't feel guilty because you're having fun, or don't feel guilty because you're laughing. Your loved one really would want you to enjoy life again. Another thing that's helpful in terms of living fully is reaching out to help someone else. That's where I can say my work with Compassionate Friends has been so therapeutic for me, because I have talked to and I have met hundreds of bereaved parents and siblings and grandparents, and sharing our stories is so therapeutic. They tell me how much talking to me has helped them, but it also helps me. It helps me a great deal. So that's one way to reach out to help others. There are other ways to reach out to help other people, whether it's through your church or synagogue, helping in child care, helping the sick and shut in your neighborhood, driving someone to a doctor's appointment, to a drugstore, just helping other people, whether it's in a soup kitchen, whether it's wherever it might be. Just helping someone else kind of takes the focus away from your pain, is what it does partially. So that can be very, very therapeutic. The other thing is to take the time that you need to grieve. I said there's no timeline, there's no deadline. Be patient with yourself. Take the time that you need to grieve. Don't rush it. Try to make life meaningful again through what we call continuing bonds. And I'll say a word about continuing bonds because for the longest time, once our loved one died, we felt like we had to sever that relationship. So we didn't focus on remembering them. Well, continuing bonds is really what it sounds like, a continuing bond with our loved one. And we can develop continuing bonds in many, many ways. From something as simple as lighting a candle in their memory or doing other things to remember. For example, many of our charities were born out of people's grief and pain. So developing a foundation in memory of your loved one, a memorial scholarship, planting a tree, naming a star, any of these things are ways to have continuing bonds with our loved ones. Other ways to have continuing bonds is to wear or keep something of theirs. For example, maybe their shirt or their cap or whatever it may be. I have a pennant with my daughter's photo on it that I wear all the time. I don't have it on tonight, but I always wear that pennant. I don't wear it quite as much as I did once, but it is a way to stay connected with her. I can wear some of her clothing, so I save some of those, and I can wear her jackets and her jewelry. In fact, I am wearing her earrings. But these are all ways to have continuing links or continuing bonds with our loved ones. So I encourage you to do that, to remember your loved one, because that helps with the healing process. It is those memories that help us to heal. This brings us to the subject of special days. Special days will be painful. Those special days are things like, for many of us, Memorial Day is a time to remember, and that those days can be very, very painful. But it is important that we claim those feelings. It's also important to remember birthdays, Wings Day, or the day that they died, and Christmas is especially difficult for people who are in acute grief. It is a family time. And because a member of the family is no longer with us, indeed it is very, very, a very difficult time. So I would encourage you to be aware that special days will be difficult. And they'll be difficult for a very long time. Now, some things that we can do during those special days, it's important that we plan to acknowledge that day in some way, whether it's lighting a candle, which we can do in the privacy of our own home, or we can plan ceremonies or other rituals, or we may also do things such as I have a memorial birthday party, for example. And it's a way to remember, get together with her friends and my friends, and we just kind of remember her life. It's also an opportunity to remember them through putting flowers in your church or synagogue, visiting the cemetery, putting fresh flowers there, any number of things. So special days are especially difficult, but it is important to be good to yourself. It's also important to turn to others for support if you need it, because it can be a very difficult time. But don't be afraid to laugh, and always remember to remember their life. Okay, to kind of summarize here, I've talked about a number of things, some of which include the fact that grief is a process, not an event. Grief is hard, hard work. And that work can be done through journaling, writing about your pain, embracing the pain, walking through the pain, because it is in walking through the pain that we get to the other side. We talked about remembering, how important it is to remember our loved ones through continuing bonds. And also we can remember our loved one through writing about them. It's also important, and we talked about how we each grieve in our own way and in our own time, that there's no deadline after which we have to stop grieving. So we grieve in our own way and in our own deadline, in our own time. And there's no one size fits all. But I can tell you, you will get better. That is the good news, that you will get better. All right. So basically, that's the end of the presentation. I will take questions from you, comments from you. I am looking here now. I see a wonderful book that you have written for your daughter. I enjoyed reading it. Oh, thank you, Marion. Okay, Cheryl asks, how do you go on to make a new life after losing a husband? How do you know when to start meeting someone new so no one thinks it's too soon? Well, that's one of those questions where you have to decide. Now, many times people will kind of raise their eyebrows if it's, it's not even been a year. That's what I hear people say most often. It hasn't even been a year yet. I think the time is up to you. I think what's more important is the motivation for the meeting and going out with other people. For example, if you're doing it to avoid the pain of the absence of your husband, then that's not a good reason to do it. If you're doing it because you just like to have the companionship of someone else, then that's a legitimate reason. But there's no set time, and I think people will give you very different times. But I guess I would say, if it's been at least a year, I think fewer eyes would be raised. I hope that answers that question. How do you make a new life after losing a husband? And that is difficult. Some of my friends have found new friends, new male friends. Others have not, and others have chosen not to. But they usually will try and get involved in something in the neighborhood, something in their local church. But the key there is reaching out to do something for other people. All right. Let's see. Whoops. I am trying to read these. Okay, I got Cheryl's. Okay, let me move on down. Dr. David, hi. Thank you. Tamara says, I feel so numb still. Tomorrow will be a month since my father died. Seems like yesterday. Oh, Tamara, I'm so sorry for your loss. Yes, it does feel like yesterday. Even after 2 months or 3 months, it still will feel like yesterday. I can't seem to focus on much of anything. Where do I begin? Well, right now, probably the most important thing to focus on is to take care of yourself. Try to get some rest, try to get something to eat, and try to do what has to be done only. Focus. Remember, we talked about how difficult it is to concentrate. The memory loss, you're not going to be able to focus for quite some time now. But try not to worry so much about that. That's a normal part of grieving, and you're grieving normally. Within a month, if you're able to get up and shower and brush your hair and get something to eat, That's pretty good for early grief for 1 month. So just realize that you sounds like you're on a normal course, and just begin with trying to take care of yourself physically first. Trying to focus on getting some sleep and some rest. Exercise. I would encourage you, if you're not already exercising, to exercise at least 15 minutes, preferably every day, would be so therapeutic for you. So I would encourage you to start with taking care of yourself, including getting some exercise. All right. Linda says, well done. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Okay. Marion tells us that her writing and journaling is the best thing for her in moving forward. Daryl says, I had a great counselor. She offered, whoops, my cursor keeps jumping back and forth here. Darnell, okay, I had a great counselor, offered that research shows that if you take the length of the relationship divided by 4 is normal grieving time. Okay, so this person is citing some research that says if you take the length of the relationship divided by 4 is the normal grieving time. Do you have any research on this? No, I do not have any research on this. Because I don't think that you can tell what your normal grieving time is going to be in advance. So I don't know if dividing it by 4, dividing it by 6 or 8. I have no research on that, and so I don't know how to answer that. I would not try to predict how long the grieving time will be, because I don't know. It just takes a long time. It's a lot longer than you want it to be. All right. Another question here, Dr. David. Would encourage them to take nutritional supplementation as well. Good point. Thank you for that reminder. I don't know if you, any of you had a chance to listen to the webinar presented by Dr. David, but in that he does talk about the need for nutritional supplements, and that you're especially in need of nutritional supplements during your grieving. A lot of resources on the website to do that. So check out the website for that. In terms of the highest quality to use, so that the stress does not cause too much damage to their bodies. So go to the website and look for that. That's the buildingstrengthwebinars.com. Other questions or comments? While I am waiting, I will just move on here to just give you this announcement about Compassionate Friends. You heard me talk so much about Compassionate Friends. They have a national conference annually, and it's going to be held here in our neck of the woods, which is Northern Virginia. So the July 4th weekend will find 12 to 1,500 bereaved parents and siblings from around the country who will converge on Washington, D.C. for a time of sharing and growing and healing. There will be numerous workshops on all kinds of things. I'm going to be presenting 2 or 3 of them. I'll be talking about the dawn of our grief, which is for newly bereaved individuals. I'll be talking about taking care of your health while grieving, because with the distraction and the inability to concentrate and the stress on the body, it's a tremendous health risk. So I do present an entire hour-and-a-half workshop on that subject alone. And I'll also be talking about writing and telling your story. For information on this national conference or for information on locating a chapter, a local chapter in your area, log on to the website, and the link is below, compassionatefriends.org, and there you will find lots of information about the conference, about local chapters, and also about our memorial walk, which will be held at the conference on Sunday morning. Also, part of that is our Friends Asking Friends virtual walk, which is online, where you can actually develop basically a link for making contributions in memory of your loved one. So it's a great way to remember your loved one and also contribute to a very worthwhile charity, which is Compassionate Friends. All contributions to Compassionate Friends are tax deductible because it is a 501c3 organization. Okay. Let's see, what other questions here? Website is above your video. Okay, the website is above my video. Okay. That they can click on the banner. So if you see the banner up there, you can click on that for the website. If a man is about to propose to his girl and the week before she loses her child, do you recommend waiting to propose or getting married? Wow. I would recommend waiting because she is so devastated by the death of her child that it would be very difficult for her to make any decisions, let alone when and whether to get married. So I would encourage you to postpone it. That's a very difficult situation, but yes, my suggestion would be to postpone the proposal. And I would also encourage you to be there to support her. You may also obtain information about Compassionate Friends. You may actually call their 800 number. You can get that from the website and actually call that number. Give them your fiance's, your friend's name and address, and they will actually mail her out a packet of materials. So I would encourage you to do that. Maybe, in another few weeks. Right now, she's probably got more to read than she'll ever want to read. But soon, not immediately, get a pack of materials sent to her. They'll ask you questions about the nature of the death and the age and that kind of thing. They will definitely send her out a pack of materials. And that goes for anyone who's lost a child of any age from any cause. Other questions or comments? While we're waiting for a couple more here. Here is what I call a recipe for living fully after loss. Take 1 cup of embracing the pain of the loss. Add to that a half a cup of turning to others for support. I want you to fold in 4 heaping tablespoons of taking care of yourself. Add to that 2 cups of remembering your loved one, 4 tablespoons of adapting to a different life, 3/4 cup of reaching out to help others. Throw in 2 or 3 pinches of connecting with a higher power. Whip together all of these ingredients together in a large bowl until soft and creamy. Bake in a warm oven until it's pleasingly brown on all sides and you begin to feel better. Sprinkle this with a teaspoon of laughter just before serving. Then relax and enjoy until you realize you really are living fully in spite of your loss. I thank you very much, and and I'll take a couple more questions or comments if there are any. I do want to thank you for sharing with us tonight, and you can see my contact information there. I didn't talk much about the fact that I do lead workshops, present workshops to churches and schools and places of business and the like. If you're interested in having me come to your city to present a workshop, I would be happy to do that. My email there is C_Ruff. So it's not a space, but it's an underscore, C_Ruff@verizon.net. And my phone number is also listed there. So I do present workshops at various places around the country now. I'll take two more questions before we sign off. And looking, okay. I don't see any more. Bernie says, thank you for sharing this with us. It was my pleasure, Bernie. Thank you for joining us. And any other comments? Going once? Going twice? Seeing no other comments, then I will say good night to you and have a pleasant rest of the evening. Let me just double check to be sure. Feels like, okay, let me just get this one here. Feels like because I didn't protect my son, I don't deserve to feel better. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's that guilt that comes out sometimes. We feel as if we should have protected our child. As a parent, we feel that that's our responsibility. But you know, you did the best that you could at the time. You know, we don't have any control over our loved one's death, certainly not our child's. But what we can do is to try to work through the guilt. I'd encourage you to perhaps write him a letter, him or her, and tell them how you feel. You can express your regrets. Chances are, nothing you could have done would have made a difference. But we do still have those feelings of guilt. So I encourage you to write a letter to him. Tell him about how you feel. That letter, you can do any number of things with it. You can save it. You can tear it up. You can burn it. Some people have burned them and then just taken the ashes from the letter to their child's grave. Some people have written a letter and taken it to the graveside and sat and read it to them there. But that's quite therapeutic. And just ask for his forgiveness. He would tell you, Mom or Dad, I'm not sure which, you have nothing to feel guilty about. But I do understand the feeling of, because you didn't save your child, that you don't deserve to be happy. But you do deserve to be happy. I am reminded of some children, of a story about some children who were playing in heaven. And the kids were all playing and having a great time. But Johnny was sitting over on the side. And everyone kept saying, Johnny, come join us. Come join us. And Johnny said, no, I can't play. I can't come and play with you. Oh, come on, Johnny. Come and play with us. And he said, you know, I can't play because my mom is so sad and she's not happy. So I can't be happy until she's happy. So you do deserve to feel better. But it takes working through those feelings to get to feeling better. Thank you for sharing that. Let me see if there are any more other questions here. Do you have a website that we could get that receipt? And I'm assuming you are talking about the receipt of this webinar. Daryl, could you please clarify uh, what it is you're asking for? If you're asking for receipt of this website, Dr. D and company will be it will be recorded. So Dr. D will be able to, Dr. David will be able to make this available on the website. Another question here is, okay, and I'll have to remember to save it and give it a title. Okay. Your presentation was good for the soul. Keep up the good work. This person participated in Compassionate Friends. They wouldn't have been themselves without them. Oh, the recipe. I mean, the recipe. Okay. Well, I tell you what, let's see, that recipe to get a copy of it. Okay. Um, hmm. Maybe I'm having it, I just click back to that slide, and maybe I'll talk to Dr. David and see if he can figure out a way that we could post that recipe. Of course, it would be included in the slide presentation that would be made available. I'm sorry, I read receipt. Okay, all right, I'm with you now, Daryl. All right, any other comments or questions? One more before I count down again. Going once, going twice. Have a good evening, everybody. Good night.